between CADCA and Grange, kind of what the Rural Youth Toolkit. We want to thank everyone for being here today. I'd imagine that the majority are huddled in the corners of their home or in their home office. And if you are in your office, I'd imagine there are not too many people around you. So we really are happy that you're able to join us here today. We're really excited about this Rural Youth Toolkit, and we're excited about telling you a little bit more about it. So my name is Robert Alvarez, and I am the Senior Manager for the CADCA Youth Leadership Initiative. This webinar is going to look at how the toolkit was created, who the toolkit is for, and actually how to use it to not only increase the amount of meaningful youth engagement in rural communities, but also how to mobilize youth towards identifying strategies and policy, and how to focus policy and advocacy efforts to address substance misuse in their communities. We've put a lot of work into this toolkit, so we're really excited. It is now available on cadca.org. If you go to the website, it's on the front page right there. You just scroll down a little bit and you can access the toolkit right there. So we are really excited moving forward, and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so first the presenters today. As I said before, my name is Robert Alvarez, and as you can see there, I am the Senior Manager for CADCA Youth Leadership Initiative. We also have Trent Coffey of the Stand Coalition, and he is also a CADCA Youth Consultant, so he was the lead on the development of the toolkit, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later. We also have joining us Reiko Mendoza, who is the Vice President of Business Development for CADCA, and representing National Grange, we have Kelly Reilly as well. Now, this toolkit was developed in partnership with Grange, or with National Grange. And just to give you a little bit of information so that then Kelly can talk to you a little bit. So the toolkit was created by CADCA in partnership with the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry, with the generous support of the RX Abuse Leadership Initiative, also known as Reilly. With the content contributions from Stand Coalition of Scott County, Tennessee, and the Rural Youth Advisory Council, composed of rural youth throughout America who care about positive community change. Now, before I turn it over to Kelly, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us on audio. Please respond in the chat box, yes, if you can hear us. And also, if you're having any technical issues, please respond to the chat box. I'm seeing a lot of yeses on there. That's really good. Awesome. Great. So during the course of the webinar, there will be opportunities for questions, but we do have a specific time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. However, if a question does happen to come to your mind while listening to or watching the webinar, feel free to enter it in the Q&A section of Zoom. So if you have any specific questions for Trent or any of us regarding the webinar, please ask those questions in the Q&A section. If you're having any technical problems, please ask your questions in the chat. Once again, questions about the webinar, Q&A, questions about any technical issues you may be having, please put that in the chat section. All right, so now our first speaker for the day is going to be Kelly Reilly, who's going to talk a little bit more about the collaboration between CADCA and National Grange.
Hi, thank you everyone for having me. So our partnership with CADCA began back around November of 2018. We were already partners with Reilly, and our National Youth Director was really looking for a way in response to youth concerns about wanting to engage their communities around some meaningful service projects instead of the one-off projects that they've done in the past, but something that we could do together as a nation, even though we're grassroots with all of our Granges. And so already being a partner with Reilly, of which CADCA was already a partner with Reilly, they said, hey, let's get you guys talking together. And we brought Robert up to Vermont to one of our conventions to speak to us. And since that time, we've started this engagement in developing this rural toolkit. And also we've taken some youth from across the country to mid-year and as well as to forum. And some of them have joined coalitions back home. And for the rest, we're going to start this plan where we go to the regionals with this toolkit. We speak to the presidents of each of their local Granges, as well as their youth directors in each of the local Granges. And then we're going to start to push this out through the Granges to surround their communities around the CADCA concepts and strategies. So we're really excited about what's going to happen next now that we have this toolkit to share. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kelly. And as Kelly mentioned, Grange was a vital partner in the creation of this. And we did work with a number of Grange youth who Trent's gonna talk about a little bit later to develop this. So we're really excited about this rollout, not just for Grange, but for all youth service providers who work with rural youth. We know that this toolkit can be a powerful tool. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our next speaker. So Trent Coffey, who was the lead developer of the Rural Youth Toolkit, is the executive director of Schools Together Allowing No Drugs, also known as STAND Coalition, a community-based coalition organized to combat youth drug and alcohol misuse. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee and has been a strong partner for change in Eastern Tennessee prevention for more than 20 years. He is a charter member of the Tennessee Certification Board, which brought recognition and certification to prevention professionals throughout the state of Tennessee. He has worked tirelessly to bring organizations together that historically operated independently. The partnerships forged with local school systems is among the strongest in the state. Trent continues to serve as the Youth Services Officer for Scott County Juvenile Court, in addition to his duties as STAND's Executive Director. Trent was recognized in 2012 for his prevention accomplishments by being selected by SAMHSA to attend the School for Prevention Leadership, one of only 10 selected nationally. Trent has been an active member of CADCA for over 17 years and attributes any success related to community building and youth engagement to the training and partnerships formed while being associated with CADCA. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present from the great state of Tennessee, Trent Coffey.
Hello, everyone. I hope everybody's safe and healthy. First of all, I want to thank CADCA and Grange for giving me this task of helping build this toolkit. It's been an enlightening, informative concept that I have got to deal with a lot of youth from around the country and engage my own youth. On this slide here, you'll see why am I qualified. I have spent over 20 years as executive director of a community coalition in Tennessee. I have worked with youth inside the juvenile court system and the local school systems and faith-based community partners with my entire career. I have built youth coalition in our area from the ground up and have made inaction to action from making my youth be involved in community events and community change. Robert, can you advance? Next slide, please. Scott County, Tennessee is a rural community in Eastern Tennessee where the economy is primarily low-skilled manufacturing and public education and healthcare professionals. The poverty rate is 28% and 80% of our youth are participants in free and reduced lunch program. Our workforce is less than 8,000 people and is in danger of losing our biggest manufacturers because there just aren't enough people to supply the demand for labor. Next slide, Robert. This toolkit was created by CADCA in partnership with the National Grange Order of Patrons of Husbandry. Oh, Robert, you read that slide, sorry. Go ahead and advance that one, I apologize. This toolkit was created, who was it created for? It was created for Grangers, youth coalitions, community organizations, religious organizations, and other groups that seek meaningful engagement of rural youth. Why it was created? The content contained in this toolkit was created to address substance misuse in rural communities through the meaningful engagement and involvement of rural youth in the process to enact lasting change that will contribute to a healthy and safe communities throughout America. Okay, advance please. What's inside? One of the things we looked at is many factors on how we engaged rural youth and the expertise we gained in that. In this toolkit, you'll see avoiding the mistakes and pitfalls when engaging rural youth, starting off on the right foot by speaking the language of rural youth, how to create, how to generate, and then maintain momentum, how to formulate a comprehensive plan to address these problems youth care about, which is one of the foundations of this toolkit, creating true advocates and leaders for the future, and providing lifelong skills to all youth in your community. The toolkit table of contents, and I'm going to try to go over them briefly because most of the guts and the narrative is in the toolkit. Part 1, background and how to meaningfully engage rural youth. One thing we had to do when we first started this process was try to define what rural areas are and how rural youth seen their communities. We had to look at risk factors and protective factors, and we see, as many other populations throughout the country, that we are unique in rural communities in the way we act, the way we worship, the way we work. So we had to identify most of those factors, some of them being risky factors that led to health disparities, and some of them being wonderful protective factors, like a family unit, like a small catchment area to come to. Then we looked at how we use in our community to engage rural youth. First of all, I had to look at what was going on in our community and see how I was engaging rural youth. And by talking to the Grange youth that I worked with and other CADCA youth from across the country, I wanted to ask them about their mistakes and what they seen was not working for them. So in this toolkit, you will see a list of rural youth engagement mistakes that we have made, that I have made myself, that we try to overcome and try to let you all see to not make those same processes a part of engaging your youth. Also, in section 1, we look at rural youth engagement tips. The main thing that I tried to get across to the youth in our focus groups and in my focus groups in my rural area is I wanted to know what was working. How are we talking to them? Instead of leading them, or instead of telling them what to do, they wanted to be shown what to do. And that's when our successes came into being, because after we showed them the process that we're going to learn in part 2, they got buy-in and they understood what they were looking for, what they were wanting to change, and how to change it. We started out with the preliminary problem analysis. We got to understand what we want to change. So we had the youth come together, and especially in my area, I said, all right, what's the problems? What do you want to change? What do you want to look at? So we had to learn our but why and our but why here, something that CADCA has built a foundation on, of letting youth be engaged and identify the problems in their community, research the problems, prove to me why it's a problem, and then look at what we have to deal with it and then address it. The but why and the but why here are identified in the problem analysis, are identified in part 1. Now to the crux, I feel, of the whole entire process is part 2, the application of CADCA's 7 strategies. Organizations and communities can be more successful in achieving community-level change related to preventing opioid misuse when their strategies are a part of a comprehensive plan that targets youth and impacts to the shared community. With CADCA's 7 strategies, we are showing and teaching youth as well as adults how to use a structure, how to use a guideline on how to address these issues that they see that are important to them. When I was first starting out in my career, I mostly dealt with adults and tried to get my youth involved through that way. But when I brought the National Youth Leadership Academy to my community about 10 years ago, and they taught these 7 strategies to them, that's when my youth group took off. That's when they started making policy changes. They started get involved in community events and activities, then it really brought them to understand that to take ownership in their community and how to change it. In this toolkit, the 7 strategies are explained, and it gives you brief examples on what to do, how to do it, and when to apply it. Part 3 is policy and advocacy. Once you have engaged your rural youth and they're on board and trained by applying CADCA's 7 strategies for community change, it's time to act. Some of the most effective efforts in substance misuse prevention have been accomplished through advocacy and policy change. Advocacy involves principles that can be applied to many different problems. The policy and advocacy piece was drawn largely from Sue Thao and her policy and advocacy piece created for CADCA. What we done is we kind of adapted it to a rural youth community or a rural youth setting and kind of put a scenario in there. We put a story in there that's something that we had to do about changing a policy. So we go step by step through the process and show how to make those policy changes with the trained youth that you have. Another main point I see in the toolkit is that not all youth are leaders. Some are workers, some are ones that want to be in the background, but those are all very important pieces. We get the strengths out of each one of them and let their voices be heard. One of the main things in section 1 that I try to emphasize is that we have to listen. If we just listen to our rural youth and see what's affecting them and what bothers them, then we can give them this toolkit on how to change it. Through the policy and advocacy piece, CADCA has created many leaders that have went on a prominent stage, like one of my friends, Curtis Mark, spoke at the United Nations. Was a wonderful honor for him. And plus, he had been trained through this youth concept and these 7 strategies. We were lucky enough to be chosen, one of my rural youth was lucky enough to be chosen last August to go meet with President Trump and talk about the Drug-Free Communities Grant. So that's all attributed to the training that he received through the NYLI that was brought to our area. We have many youth that have went on to be successful and find their own way. And through these strategies that they're taught, they're carrying on into their college field. Adapting these strategies to your community, to your unique community, and being able to make them, for lack of a better word, homegrown and make them unique to your own community is one of the greatest assets, excuse me, of this toolkit. You can tailor it to your needs and it'll work in many situations. We're focusing right here mostly on substance abuse, but it can be adapted into different things that youth see that are important to them. Meaningful engagement and involvement of rural youth can be used as a framework to address the risk factors and contributing factors to substance use and misuse rates in any particular community. Through collective action, it is possible to improve the health and well-being of rural communities and reduce the burden of substance use and misuse in our area. I hope you'll be able to go through the toolkit and look at a lot of the examples and a lot of the descriptions that are involved in it. It kind of gives you a guideline on each of the 7 strategies and the policy and advocacy piece and how to define your community. I think that's about all I got for the explanation of the toolkit. Unless there's any questions, I want to thank Robert for tasking us with this, and Grange. I'm actually a Grange member now. As I was telling Kelly before, I started researching local Grange and we have a lot of similarities. And I joined my local Grange. It's about an hour away from me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to work with them and have learned a lot about Grange itself.
All right, thank you, Trent. So I asked Trent to provide basically a basic overview of the toolkit. The majority of the content is contained in the toolkit itself. But something I just really wanted to talk about is, and wanted to let everyone know, is that this toolkit was created based on the methodology that the toolkit actually contains. What do I mean by that? One of the first steps that Trent mentioned was the importance of actually bringing youth to the table during the problem analysis and during the strategic planning process. I don't have any photos here right now, but we actually had rural youth from all over the country, some of them Grange youth, some of them youth that had previously been trained by CADCA, coming together at our National Leadership Forum at mid-year, and we actually had a couple hours set aside, and their input was crucial to the development of this toolkit. So the content that you actually find in the toolkit was not only developed leveraging the expertise and experience that Trent has built up over the last 20 years, but also directly from rural youth themselves. In addition, we also, as Trent mentioned, we also utilized some of the knowledge built up by Sue Tha, who's a public policy consultant for CADCA. And she really helped out on the development of the policy and advocacy training portion. And then, of course, all of our materials also were informed by best practices in research, especially for those of you that don't know, the CDC just released a best practices manual for youth engagement as well. So everything that you find in the toolkit is something that you'll truly be able to use. And especially, like I said, that policy and advocacy piece, where it's really a how-to in terms of conducting a power analysis and being able to move forward and institute change in your community. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the floor for questions that anyone may have. Just to review, the toolkit is available for download at cadca.org. And you can go just kind of scroll a little bit to the bottom. There's 3 windows there, and it should be in the bottom middle window. And you can access the toolkit right now. So if anyone else has any questions, you can please put them into the Q&A box that is on your screen right there, and myself or Trent or Kelly will answer them for you. So I believe the question and answer box is open. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them there. Okay, we've got the first question here from Jesse Jimenez. Trent, I believe this would be for you. I'm curious how you all define what rural is. Within the context of the toolkit, Trent, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things we done when we met in DC with a couple of Grange members, this was back in February of last year. That's the main thing that we had to do. We had to identify what was cohesive with us and what we felt rural was. In the toolkit, what we identified that some of the common factors was poverty. Poverty was usually associated with rural areas. Geographical isolation, how we're being disconnected from, we feel like, a bigger part of the society. And there was a few other little anecdotes in there that we talked about stigma, different things like that. But we addressed them and brought them down to pretty much poverty, which encompasses a lot of that. And then the geographical isolation is 2 of the main things that we focused on that was cohesive, with about 10 participants from different states and different areas across the country at different times. Did that answer your question?
All right. Thank you, Jesse. All right. Any other questions? So
Robert, I can't emphasize enough, like you said, and I didn't mention it in my part, but the engagement with the CADCA youth and the rural youth in DC, in Texas, and on several different focus group calls and different things like that, was imperative to this whole entire process. It was what led the whole entire thing. And we all think we're really different and work in silos ourselves in rural areas, but we've seen that a lot of those protective factors were strong in our areas, and we tried to capitalize on them in the toolkit also.
Thank you, Trent. All right, Trent, we have another question here from Raymond Medley. Do rural youth like the title rural?
Well, it depends. For me, from the students that I talked to, rural was okay. I mean, some of them thought there was a stigma associated with it, but we started talking about, again, the protective factors of rural. You're strong family centric. You have a lifelong relationships. You have strong neighbor partners where if something goes wrong in rural areas, there's always somebody there to help you out. So we kind of just turned that stigma into a term of endearment, I guess, is for lack of a better term, and tried to redefine rural as not a negative thing, but as a positive thing.
All right, thank you. We have another question here from JP Heath. How would you suggest engaging with youth while most will be going to online classes during the pandemic? Is there a platform or method you know of to present remotely? Trent, you want to take a crack at that? And then I've got something as well.
Okay. One of the things we talk about in section 1 is know their language and know their communication devices. That answer is with your rural youth. They are communicating in some way. And by opening up that conversation and talking to them, they'll let you know whether it be Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, TikTok, they'll let you know how they're communicating. And when they give you that avenue, then you can capitalize on that and really engage them at their level and where they're at and how they're communicating.
All right. And I'd also like to add, JP, actually the platform we're using right now, Zoom, is a very, very easy to use, very kind of straightforward platform that is free of charge as well. And there are a lot of other platforms that are offering their services free during the pandemic. So as Trent mentioned, you know, kind of leveraging the youth that you have as a way to kind of spread the awareness about any upcoming webinars that you may want to do with young people, or you know, or meetings. Definitely leveraging something like Zoom would be extremely helpful. And a lot of the apps that they use, they can actually live chat each other through Snapchat as well, right? So that's another way for you to you can potentially broadcast on Snapchat and then have your youth tune in as well. So definitely leverage the youth, but I mean, the first one I'd recommend is the platform we're using right now, which is Zoom. All right, next question from, let's see here, going down. Okay, so from Kelly Bingham, have you used this toolkit with the faith-based community?
Kelly, we have one of the protective factors that we have identified in the toolkit is that the faith-based community, is mostly strong in rural areas. Although we have different churches, I know in my rural area we have I've got a population of about 22,000, and I've got about 150 churches. Most of them's Baptist, but most of them practice different ways or interpret the Bible in different ways. So hopefully each of those congregations have youth involved. So what we try to do with a few of them, and it was a few of the larger ones, which I'm seeing now that the smaller ones are sometimes more active, but I engaged this toolkit with some of the youth groups and individually taught them and let them come up with that concept and that problem analysis on their own. And then after they had some successes, bringing groups together and letting them focus on as a collective on a community issue. So yes, we have used it in the faith-based community. A little hard to get started, but when you get it going and they see the concept and see it work, they really get buy-in on it. and then use it for several different, use the 7 strategies for several different health disparities and other problematic issues that are in their community.
All right, thank you, Kelly. A question from Raquel Ramos. Has this toolkit been implemented in tribal communities? If so, what was the outcome? I'll go ahead and answer this one, Trent. Raquel, thank you for joining us. For the moment, well, Trent, have you had this experience in Tennessee?
No, Robert, I haven't. I don't have a lot of exposure to tribal communities in the eastern part of Tennessee.
Okay, so Raquel, as you know, the 7 strategies themselves and a lot of the content within the toolkit has been successfully implemented in tribal communities. In your own state of Oklahoma, we have a lot of some coalitions who have done some amazing work with youth, and a lot of the same concepts and you really experience in content knowledge that CADCA has developed over the last 3 decades is really a strong piece of this toolkit. So the strategies and concepts within the toolkit very much are a part of what CADCA has been doing for quite some time. So while this specific toolkit, the way that it's packaged right now, has not been used in tribal communities, the concepts and strategies have successfully been used in tribal communities. That was a great question. Thank you, Raquel. Next question from Isaac Wolf. One thing I've noticed in rural communities is a strong ability to improvise, especially to make up for a lack of services, i.e. pastor acting as a counselor, for instance. Does this plan take advantage of that strength?
I guess that one's for me, Robert. And yes, it does. What you're doing is you're going to identify your champions to engage the youth. And that's one of the things the toolkit does. In a rural area, you wear many, many hats. I do myself as youth service officer. I'm on the child protection team. I'm the executive director of STAND. So yes, I see that dynamic play out in a lot of things that happen in our community. And especially, like you said, with the pastor and being the counselor and working also, that's something that's just normal for rural life because of the lack of services that we have. Using their expertise and giving them a little structure to use with youth is definitely something we address in this toolkit, and it's something that's very beneficial to the user.
All right, thank you. Kelly, I think this next question is for you. What is the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry?
So we are a fraternity, an agricultural fraternity, particularly for farmers, though over time, as not all the communities have remained farming communities, we find ourselves just that, in communities. So most of our granges have halls, and they serve as a community meeting place, and they're a family-based organization. And we have a youth division, which runs ages 14 to 34, and then we also have a junior leadership program. We're original donors, if you will, to establishing 4-H. The majority of our youth belong to things like 4-H, FFA. I think it kind of also works with the next question as well about having rural youth meet together. And Grange has been just that, a place because it engages whole families, for families to come together and do community work. Most of our granges, all of our granges, do community service work in their local communities, sometimes in partnership with other grangers or in partnership with other community-based organizations. And we are super passionate about this cause and CADCA's cause because it's something we've identified as problems in those rural communities, and the youth having concerns about that and bringing it forward and wanting to engage around that. We have about 150,000 grangers across the country, a chunk of those being youth, of course, and that's what brings us to the table here. And if anybody has specific questions about Grange, they can ask me directly offline if you wanted to share an email address, and we'd be happy to discuss that with them as well.
Thank you, Kelly. Trent, do you have anything to chip in on the best settings for rural youth meet together in addition to what Kelly said?
Yeah, Shannon's question. Yeah, for us, one of the greatest partners we have and one of our greatest relationships is with the school systems. They have the encatchment area where the youth are at, and that's one of our protective factors. It's something that we enact in daily. We've been actively engaged in rural youth for about the past 10 years after I think we finally figured it out. But we knew to encompass ourselves and be involved in the school system by going in there and helping them out and being a part of their process has really taken off, has really made our youth coalition grow to over 80 members strong. And we're utilizing places like the Boys and Girls Club or fellowship halls and different things like that, that we can pull them together. Yes, it is challenging. Transportation's always an issue. That's why catching them at school is one of the major components of being rural, but you also have to respect the school because they have so much they have to teach in such a little bit of time. So taking those slots wherever you can and being encompassed in their process and being there as a, I want to help you and not this is what I want you to do is one of the reasons that the school systems and the local organizations like churches and stuff are one of our biggest supporters.
All right. Thank you, Trent. Next question is more of a comment. May I suggest, this is an anonymous attendee. May I suggest being careful about connecting via social media with students? That's a great point. Definitely always make sure that any type of outreach, I mean, the number one thing to remember when you're working with youth is that first and foremost, above all, is the safety and security of youth. And then that's also making sure that if you are reaching out on social media, you're not using necessarily personal messages. You know, make sure if you are reaching out that it's through an official coalition or organizational account, right? So it provides transparency. And that you're being very, very intentional about the way that you're reaching out to youth through social media. Make sure that it attaches to a larger strategy and that a lot of people within the coalition or within your youth serving organization are aware of how you're going about this. It's a great point, anonymous attendee. Thank you for bringing that into the discussion. Another question here from Raymond Medley. With developing this toolkit, did you get feedback from minority youth in rural communities? And I'll go ahead and answer that, Raymond. Yes, we did. So we had youth from Southern Louisiana, Tennessee, rural Texas, Ohio,
Washington State.
Washington State. So number one, geographically rural. Number two, we definitely had minority youth. It was an extremely diverse rural youth cross-section. We had some tribal input. We had tribal youth there. We also had young African-American youth from a rural community in Southern Louisiana. We had Latina youth from rural Texas, rural Washington as well. We even, from all over the place. We had someone participate when Trent mentioned Washington State. We're talking about an island off the coast of Washington as well. So we definitely were very, very conscientious about making sure that we had ethnic and geographic diversity within the context of rural communities. Thank you for that, Raymond. All right, and next here. All right, we've got a few more questions. We still got time. Not a question, but so this is Taylor Blackman. I would like to comment on meeting kids where they are, especially to make connections. Following our youth philanthropy board meeting last week, I mentioned with a few of our more quiet youth that don't seem that way on social media that I would like to make a TikTok with them at our next meeting. Instantly, I felt as if they opened up to me more and had more enthusiasm with me than I had experienced. Thank you for that comment, Taylor. That's very true. You know, taking youth input, paying attention to what social media they're using or things that they're passionate about. You know, anytime you're looking at engaging people, making sure that you meet them where they are and understanding what makes them want to be involved is extremely important. So making sure that youth input is there when you're looking at youth recruitment is extremely important. Thank you for that. Someone else, is there a cost for the toolkits? There is not. It is absolutely free, available to everyone. Go to cadca.org and right there on the front page, you will find the Rural Youth Toolkit, and it is completely free to download. And feel free to send it out to everyone else as well. And as an added bonus, we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending this out in email to all of you that registered and participated moving forward. So feel free to share far and wide. Thank you for that, anonymous attendee. Okay, Latasha Murray, what age group are you considering youth? Trent, do you want to talk about this? And then Kelly, you can chime in as well, and then I'll talk about it from a CADCA perspective.
From the focus groups we had with the time allotted, mostly what we used in our focus groups were roughly teenagers, 13 through 18. I know Grange considers youth, I think, Kelly, until they're 27 or something like that. I'm not sure. But in this aspect, we dealt with them, which there was a couple of people in the focus group that were in their early 20s. So I would say from 13 to 24 is the ones I had exposure to in my part of this toolkit preparation.
So for Grange, we have two groups of them, 4.5 to 14 years old and 14 to 34, actually. And I know that CADCA, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, is to 25.
Yeah, we have, so it is important to realize, especially when we're talking about rural communities sometimes mean smaller populations. And when we're talking about smaller populations, the concept of what is a youth tends to expand a little bit. So the content was created with that in mind, to be flexible. So within CADCA, we do officially recognize, at least for registration for our big events, through 20 is the age for youth. But internationally, you know, we do when we do youth leadership trainings in Costa Rica or the Philippines or East Africa, for instance, we're training youth from 14 to the age of roughly 23 or 24. So a lot of it really depends on context. And like I said, the toolkit was designed with that in mind. Typically, the training we do stateside with CADCA is 13 to 18. So like I said, it was really designed to be expansive. But for the sake of you working directly with youth, generally it is advisable to primarily focus especially if there's bigger groups of youth, 13 to 18 range, and even separating middle schoolers and high schoolers can be good depending on how many youth you have in your community. But a lot of it really depends on context as well. All right. So I think that looks like all the questions right there. We'll give another couple of seconds here, maybe more than a couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds for anyone that has any more questions. All right, we had one more comment here from Shannon Sproul. Going back to what Taylor said about quiet kids and TikTok, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting her comment correctly, but I took her comment to mean that it's important to find ways for all kids to participate. Quiet ones need different approaches, and it sounds like suggesting TikTok was something that reached those particular students and found a way for them to participate more than speaking up in a group. Yeah, absolutely. Very good point, Shannon, and I may have misinterpreted the question before, but thank you for shedding additional light on it. So I believe that's all the questions we have. So if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to youth@cadca.org. Once again, the toolkit is available at cadca.org. If you have any questions about engaging rural youth or anything else regarding youth involvement in substance misuse prevention, please reach out to youth@cadca.org. Also, if you're curious about Grange, go ahead and Kelly, I'm not sure if there's a website that they can go to if they're curious about Grange or interested in becoming more involved there.
Yeah, I'll put it up on the question and answer right now. So
okay, perfect. So if you're curious about Grange, go on there. Please go on, download the toolkit, as I said, disperse it far and wide. We're really excited about this. If you have any other additional questions, once again, you can reach out to youth@cadca.org. As you can see here, we're on all of the social media platforms with the exception of Snapchat and TikTok. We haven't quite convinced General Dean of that yet, but you know, that's sometime in the future maybe. But once again, wanted to thank everyone for participating today. Like I said, I realize that most of you are participating from the comfort of your home or probably by yourself in your office. We want to thank you for taking time out of your day to be a part of this webinar. Please stay connected and wash your hands. And all right, thank you everyone once again for participating. And that is going to conclude the webinar for the day. I can't say thank you enough. All right, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.